My father called daily, pleading for help with a family crisis. I flew 4 hours only to find bags packed for a ski trip. They tossed me their kids and left, mocking my childless life. They thought I was a free babysitter, so I called the cops. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The vibration of my phone against the hard plastic of the tray table was the only thing keeping me awake. I stared out the airplane window at the gray slush of clouds below, my stomach tying itself into intricate, painful knots. It was the 5th time my father, Frank, had called me since I boarded, but I couldn't answer mid-flight. The voicemail notification popped up the second we hit the tarmac. His voice had been escalating in panic for a week. Every day, like clockwork, the phone would ring during my lunch break, then again just as I was leaving my office. "Hannah, we need you," he had said on Tuesday, his voice cracking in a way that terrified me. Frank was a stoic man. He didn't do vulnerability. He didn't do need. "It's a disaster here. Jessica is falling apart. I don't know what to do. Please just come home for Christmas. We need family. We need you." I had resisted at first. As a senior compliance officer for a major financial firm, the end of the year was my busiest season. I lived by a code of strict regulations, deadlines, and unyielding structure. My life in Chicago was ordered, quiet, and mine. Going back to my childhood home usually meant chaos, criticism, and the subtle, biting feeling that I was an outsider in my own bloodline. But the desperation in his voice had chipped away at my resolve. "Family emergency," he had texted on Thursday. "Please." So I did what the dutiful eldest daughter always does. I canceled my meetings. I worked 3 18-hour days to clear my desk. I booked a wildly expensive last-minute flight, packed a bag, and flew 4 hours south, convinced I was walking into a tragedy. Was someone sick? Was Jessica's marriage ending? Was the house being foreclosed on? I grabbed my carry-on and practically ran through the terminal, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't even wait for an Uber. I hailed a cab and told the driver to step on it. The anxiety was a physical weight on my chest, heavy and suffocating. I imagined my sister, Jessica, in tears. I imagined my father stooped and defeated. I prepared myself to be the rock, the fixer, the one they leaned on when the world crumbled. I pulled up to the house, a sprawling 2-story colonial that looked perfectly manicured, and threw cash at the driver. I didn't even wait for my change. I sprinted up the walkway, my boots skidding on the icy pavement, and burst through the front door without knocking. "I'm here," I shouted, dropping my bag in the foyer, breathless. "Dad, Jess, is everyone okay?" The silence I expected didn't exist. Instead, the house was vibrating with energy. But it wasn't the frantic energy of a crisis. It was the chaotic, joyful bustle of preparation. Frank walked into the hallway from the kitchen. He wasn't crying. He wasn't stooped. He was wearing a brand new, bright red North Face ski jacket and holding a steaming mug of coffee. He looked at me, checked his watch, and smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that felt more like a transaction closing than a father greeting his daughter. "Good," he said, taking a sip. "You made good time. We were worried you hit traffic." I stood there panting, my brain trying to recalibrate. "Dad, what? What is this? You said it was an emergency." Before he could answer, Jessica came bounding down the stairs. She was dressed in designer thermal wear, a white fur headband already perfectly positioned on her blonde blowout. She looked radiant, not devastated. Trailing behind her was her husband, Mark, struggling with 3 massive suitcases and a set of skis. "Oh, thank God," Jessica said, breezing past me to check her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Did you bring the iPad charger? I think I left mine." "What is going on?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Where is the emergency?" Frank chuckled, clapping a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, patronizing. "The emergency, Hannah, is that our nanny quit 3 days ago, right before our Aspen trip." I froze, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What?" We've had this trip booked for months, Mark chimed in, dropping the skis with a loud clatter. He didn't even look at me, he was too busy checking his phone. Adults only. No kids allowed at the lodge, it's exclusive. So, I started, the realization dawning on me like a bucket of ice water. You called me. You made me think someone was dying because you lost your babysitter. Don't be dramatic, Jessica snapped to her. Ning from the mirror. We didn't say anyone was dying, we said we needed you, and we do. She walked over to the living room archway and whistled. Kids, Auntie Hannah is here. Two screaming toddlers, my niece and nephew, aged 2 and 4, came thundering into the hallway. They were cute, but they were currently covered in something sticky, and the youngest was wearing nothing but a diaper that was visibly sagging. There's food in the fridge, Frank said, stepping around me to open the front door. Cold air rushed in, biting at my flushed face. We ordered groceries, nothing fancy, but you can cook. Just keep them alive, keep the house clean, and we'll be back on the 28th. I stood rooted to the spot, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I am not babysitting, Dad. I have a job, I have a life. You lied to me. Frank stopped in the doorway, his face hardening. The mask of the jovial father slipped, revealing the bully underneath. You have a career, Hannah, not a life. You live alone in an apartment. You have no husband, no kids. What exactly are you rushing back to? Your spreadsheets. We're doing you a favor, Jessica added, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet venom she had perfected in high school. She picked up a package of diapers from the entry table and tossed it at me. I caught it instinctively, the crinkle of the plastic echoing in the tense silence. Here, she said, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. Get some practice in. Maybe if you learn how to take care of a family, you won't end up dying alone. They laughed, all 3 of them. A collective, dismissive sound that stripped me of my adulthood, my achievements, and my dignity in a single second. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was the realization that to them, I wasn't a person. I was just a utility they could summon and discard. The laughter hung in the air, toxic and thick. I looked down at the package of diapers in my hands, size 4, generic brand, and then back up at the people who were supposed to be my support system. My chest heaved, not from exertion anymore, but from a rage so pure and hot it felt like it might burn through my throat. I am leaving, I said. My voice was low, trembling not with tears, but with the effort of holding back a scream. I am turning around, getting back in a cab, and going to the airport. Mark rolled his eyes, hoisting the ski bag onto his shoulder. Don't be a bitch, Hannah. The deposit on the lodge is non-refundable. It's $5,000. I don't care about your deposit, Mark, I spat back. I care that you manipulated me. I care that I thought Dad was having a heart attack. Frank stepped closer, invading my personal space. He used his height to intimidate, a tactic that had worked when I was 12, but I wasn't 12 anymore. I was 32. I managed audits for Fortune 500 companies. I stared down CEOs who tried to hide millions in offshore accounts. But standing there, in the entryway of the house I grew up in, I felt the old dynamic clawing at my ankles. You are not leaving, Frank said, his voice dropping to a growl. These are your family members. These are your blood. We are asking for 1 week. 1 week of your time to help your sister, who is actually building a legacy unlike you. A legacy, I laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. You mean the kids she's currently abandoning to go drink expensive wine in a hot tub? It's called a marriage retreat, Jessica corrected, adjusting her gloves. Something you wouldn't understand. Marriages take work, Hannah, but you wouldn't know about that, would you? Since you couldn't even keep Brian. The mention of my ex-fiancé was a low blow, calculated to hurt. Brian had left 3 years ago because he couldn't handle the intensity of my job and, ironically, the demands of my intrusive family. This isn't about Brian, I said, my voice steadying. This is about you lying to get me here to be unpaid help. It's settled, Frank announced, checking his watch again. The car is here, we have to go. They started moving. It was surreal. They were actually leaving. They began shuttling bags out the door to the waiting SUV service. The cold wind swirled around my ankles. The kids, sensing the departure, started to whine. The 4-year-old Leo tugged on my coat. "Auntie Hannah, I'm hungry." I looked down at him, then back at my father. "Dad, if you walk out that door, I am not staying. I will leave these kids here." Frank stopped halfway to the car and turned. He looked at me with genuine pity, shaking his head. "No, you won't. You're too responsible, Hannah. You've always been the good girl. You'd never endanger a child. You'll stay because you have to." He was weaponizing my own morality against me. He knew I wouldn't leave 2 toddlers alone in a house with a gas stove and stairs. He knew I followed the rules. Jessica walked past me, blowing a kiss to the kids. "Bye, sweeties. Mommy loves you. B." Good for Auntie Hannah? She didn't even hug them. She didn't look back at me. She just walked to the car, her focus entirely on the vacation ahead. Mark followed, slamming the trunk. "Have a nice week, Hannah," Frank called out from the passenger seat. "Try to clean the gutters if you get a chance. They're looking full." And then they drove away. I stood in the open doorway, watching the black SUV disappear down the street, the red taillights fading into the gray winter afternoon. I was holding a bag of diapers. 2 crying children were clinging to my legs. I was stranded in a house that wasn't mine, with no car seats, and a family that viewed me as nothing more than an appliance. I closed the door, shutting out the cold. The silence that followed the engine's fade was deafening. The kids were looking up at me, eyes wide, waiting for direction. Panic flared, hot and bright. I could feel the walls closing in. They were right. I couldn't just leave the kids. I was trapped. But as I looked at the digital lock on the front door, and then at the security cameras Frank had installed in every corner of the house to protect his assets, a different kind of coldness settled over me. It was the icy clarity I felt right before I flagged a major compliance violation at work. Frank thought he knew me. He thought I was just the responsible daughter, the doormat, the rule follower. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I didn't just follow rules, I enforced them. And they had just broken a very big, very legal one. I herded Leo and the 2-year-old, Sophie, into the living room and turned on the TV to a cartoon channel. Sophie was smelling ripe, so I robotically changed her diaper, the muscle memory from years of babysitting them, while Jessica got her nails done kicking in, and handed them both juice boxes I found in the fridge. Once they were settled, I sat at the kitchen island, the granite countertop cold against my palms. I needed to think. I needed to understand how we had gotten here. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the crescendo of a lifetime of conditioning. Since Mom died 10 years ago, Frank had anointed Jessica the proxy matriarch, simply because she looked like Mom and had married a man Frank approved of. I, on the other hand, was the investment. I was the one who got the good grades, the scholarships, the high-paying job. But my success was never celebrated. It was utilized. When Frank's hardware store hit a rough patch 3 years ago, who wired him $20,000? I did. When Jessica needed a down payment for her first house because Mark's trust fund was tied up in probate, I wrote the check. I had bought my way into their good graces for years, thinking that if I was useful enough, I would eventually be loved. I looked around the kitchen. It was pristine, renovated last year, probably with the money I had loaned Frank that he never paid back. On the counter sat a stack of mail. I flipped through it idly. An overdue notice for the water bill. A final warning for a credit card in Jessica's name. The picture was becoming clearer. They weren't just entitled, they were broke. Or at least, cash poor. The ski trip was likely a desperate attempt to keep up appearances, a Hail Mary to maintain the facade of the wealthy, perfect family, and they couldn't afford the nanny anymore. They couldn't afford me unless I was free. I thought about Frank. He was a man who built his self-worth on control. He loved to play the benevolent patriarch, but he was a tyrant in disguise. He used affection as a currency, withholding it when we stepped out of line. He knew exactly where to press to make me feel small, my single status, my lack of children, my boring job. And Jessica was his masterpiece. She was beautiful, vapid, and cruel. She had learned early on that tears got her what she wanted, and when tears failed, malice worked just as well. She viewed her children as accessories, cute props for Instagram photos, but inconvenient when they required actual care. The text message tone on my phone startled me. It was frank. "Don't forget the recycling goes out on Wednesday, and don't let the kids eat sugar after 6 p.m. Thanks, sweetie." The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't even worried. He was sitting in a heated car seat, probably discussing wine lists with Mark, completely confident that I was currently scrubbing his dishes and stewing in my own inadequacy. I looked at the kids in the other room. They were innocent in this. They didn't ask to be pawns. But if I stayed, if I submitted to this, I was teaching them that this behavior was acceptable. I was teaching them that people like Frank and Jessica always win. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow was starting to fall, dusting the driveway where they had left me. They thought they had trapped me in a domestic prison. They thought my love for the kids and my fear of Frank's disapproval would keep me silent and compliant for 7 days. I unlocked my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled past Dad. I scrolled past Jessica. I stopped at a contact I had saved for professional reasons, a number I used when a company I was auditing refused to hand over documents and tried to intimidate me. I wasn't a babysitter today. I was a compliance officer, and I was about to conduct the most aggressive audit of my life. I dialed the number. The voice on the other end of the line was sharp, professional, and instantly calming. It was Sarah, a shark of a family law attorney and my best friend since college. She was the only person outside of my work life who understood that my coldness was actually a survival mechanism. "Let me get this straight," Sarah said, the clicking of her keyboard audible in the background. "They lured you there under false pretenses, explicitly stated they were leaving for a week-long vacation, and then physically left the premises while you were under duress, leaving 2 minors in your care without your consent." "Yes," I said, watching Sophie stack blocks in the living room. "They laughed, Sarah. They threw diapers at me and drove away. They think because I'm family, the law doesn't apply." "Hannah, that isn't just a jerk move. That is legally actionable," Sarah said, her voice dropping into her courtroom register. "If you did not agree to be the guardian and they left anyway, that is child abandonment. In the eyes of the state, those children are currently unattended because the legal guardians have vacated their responsibility." "I don't want the kids to get hurt," I whispered, turning my back to the living room so Leah wouldn't see my shaking hands. "I don't want them in the system, but I cannot let Frank and Jessica do this. If I fold now, they will own me forever. They'll know they can trick me, use me, and discard me whenever they want." "Then don't fold," Sarah said firmly. "You're an auditor, Hannah. Audit them. Document everything. Timestamps, text messages, the condition of the house, the supplies left for the children. Build a file that makes it impossible for them to say you agreed to this. And then give them one chance to cure the breach." "One chance." "Call them, record the call. Tell them to return immediately or you will involve the authorities. When they refuse, and they will refuse, you pull the trigger. But you have to be ready, Hannah. Once you start this, there is no going back to Christmas dinners." "There haven't been real Christmas dinners in years, Sarah," I said, looking at the family photo on the mantel where I was conspicuously absent. "Just performance reviews." I hung up and went to work. I didn't panic, I didn't cry, I compartmentalized. I became the senior compliance officer. First, I secured the scene. I went through the kitchen, opening cupboards and the fridge. I took photos. The fridge was stocked with beer, wine, and expensive cheeses, but almost no actual food for children. No milk, no fruit, just a half-eaten box of nuggets in the freezer. Exhibit A, lack of provisions. Next, I went to the entryway where the handoff had occurred. I took a photo of the timestamp on the security system panel showing when the alarm was disarmed and when the front door was opened and closed. Exhibit B, timeline of abandonment. Then I needed the children's information. If I was going to call the police or if there was a medical emergency, I needed insurance cards, doctor contacts, anything. I knew Frank kept all important documents in his home office, a room we were forbidden from entering as kids. I walked in. The air smelled of stale cigar smoke and expensive leather. I went to the mahogany desk and started opening drawers. It was a mess. Papers were shoved in haphazardly, very unlike the meticulously organized facade Frank presented to the world. I found the kids' birth certificates and social security cards in a folder marked grandkids. I set those aside. But as I dug deeper for insurance info, I found a red folder buried under a stack of Golf Digest magazines. It was marked urgent. Curiosity is a professional hazard for me. I opened it. The breath hissed out of my teeth. It was a foreclosure notice, dated 3 weeks ago. The bank was threatening to auction the house in 90 days if arrears weren't paid. Beneath that was a letter from a collection agency regarding a defaulted business loan. And beneath that was a maxed-out credit card statement for a card I didn't recognize, in Jessica's name, but with a balance of $40,000. I sat back in Frank's leather chair, the leather creaking under my weight. They weren't just cash poor. They were drowning. They were completely insolvent. The ski trip wasn't a celebration. It was a delusion. They were spending $5,000. They didn't have to pretend they were still the royalty of suburbia, while literally leaving their children and their debts behind for me to deal with. And then I saw it. A sticky note attached to the foreclosure letter in Frank's handwriting. Ask H for loan after Christmas. Say it's for expansion. I wasn't a daughter to him. I was a line of credit. The rage that had been simmering in my gut cooled into something hard and sharp, like a diamond. I took a picture of the documents. Exhibit C, motive. I had everything I needed. I waited an hour. Enough time for them to be well onto the highway, far enough that turning around would be a major inconvenience, but close enough that they could do it if they chose their children over their ego. I sat the kids down with a movie and went into the kitchen. I placed my phone on the granite island and hit dial on Frank's number. I set it to speaker and started my voice recorder on my work phone. It rang 4 times. Hannah, Frank's voice boomed, loud and irritated. I could hear wind noise. He was on the car's Bluetooth. We are trying to navigate. Why are you calling? Turn around, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the pleading tone he was used to. Excuse me. You have been gone for 90 minutes, I said, checking the oven clock. I am giving you the opportunity to fix this. Turn the car around. Come back and pick up your children. If you are not in this driveway by 5:00 p.m., I am calling the police and reporting you for child abandonment. There was a beat of silence, and then Mark's laughter erupted from the background. Is she serious? God, she's such a buzzkill. Hannah, stop the drama, Jessica's voice cut in. We are not coming back. We paid for the lodge. You are their aunt. Stop being selfish and just watch them. It's 1 week. You're acting like we left them on a street corner. You left them with a person who explicitly told you she could not care for them, I countered. Legally, Jessica, that is abandonment. And considering what I just found in Dad's desk, I don't think you can afford a legal battle right now. The silence on the line was instant and absolute. The wind noise seemed to get louder. What were you doing in my desk? Frank's voice was low, dangerous. Looking for the kids' insurance cards, which you didn't leave me, I lied smoothly. But I found the foreclosure notice instead, and the collection's letters. You have no right, Frank sputtered, his composure cracking. That is private business. It became my business when you tried to trap me here to babysit so you could blow money you don't have, I said. I see the note, Dad. Ask H for loan. You were planning to guilt-trip me into bailing you out again after you got back, weren't you? We are family, Jessica screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. You have plenty of money. You sit in that apartment with your cat and your retirement funds. Why shouldn't you help us? I have children. I have expenses. You have a ski trip you can't afford, I corrected. And you have 2 hours to get back here. I am not negotiating, Dad. 5:00 p.m. If the car isn't here, I make the call. You won't do it, Frank said. He was trying to regain control, trying to sound authoritative, but I could hear the tremor of fear underneath. You'd never embarrass the family like that. You'd never have the police come to my house. Think about the neighbors, Hannah. Think about your reputation. My reputation is sterling, I said. Yours is the one about to be foreclosed on. If you call the cops, Mark shouted, trying to sound tough, I'll sue you for harassment. Bring it on, Mark, I said. I'd love to see you explain to a judge why you went skiing while your house was being repossessed. 5:00 p.m. I hung up. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum solo against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I had poked the bear. I had shattered the illusion. They knew that I knew. But Frank's last words stuck with me. You won't do it. He was banking on my shame. He was banking on the decades of training that taught me to keep family secrets, to hide the bruises, to polish the image. He truly believed that I would suffer in silence rather than let the neighbors see a squad car in the driveway. I looked at the clock, 2:15 p.m. I made the kids sandwiches. I played Legos with Leo. I rocked Sophie until she fell asleep for her nap. I was a good aunt. I loved them. And that was exactly why I had to do this. Because leaving them with people who prioritized a facade over their well-being was the real danger. The hours ticked by. 3:00 p.m. 4:00 p.m. I watched the driveway. I checked my phone. No texts. No calls. They were calling my bluff. They were probably at a rest stop, laughing, convincing themselves that I was too weak to follow through. Hannah always caves, they were saying. She'll be angry, but she'll do it. 4:55 p.m. The sun had set. The streetlights flickered on. The driveway remained empty. 5:00 p.m. I didn't hesitate. I didn't waver. I picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the local police department. Police dispatch, what is your emergency? It's not a life-threatening emergency, I said clearly. But I need to report a case of child abandonment. My name is Hannah, and I am at my father's house. The wait for the police was surreal. The house was quiet, the Christmas lights on the tree twinkling with a cheerful irony. I had packed a small bag for the kids, diapers, wipes, the stuffed animals I knew they slept with. I didn't know what the procedure would be, but I prepared for the worst. When the cruiser pulled up at 5:20 p.m., the flashing blue lights reflecting off the snow on the lawn, I felt a pang of nausea. This was the nuclear option. This was the moment the bridge didn't just burn, it exploded. 2 officers came to the door. One was an older man, Officer Miller, who looked like he'd seen everything. The other was a younger woman, Officer Ramirez, who looked sharp and empathetic. Ma'am, Officer Miller asked, stepping into the foyer, you called about abandoned minors. Yes, I said, inviting them in. My niece and nephew, ages 2 and 4. I led them to the kitchen where I had my evidence laid out on the island like a court exhibit. My laptop was open, showing the time-stamped photos. The recording of the call with Frank was queued up. My father, sister, and brother-in-law asked me to come visit for Christmas, I explained, keeping my voice level and factual. When I arrived at noon, they informed me they were leaving for a week-long trip to Aspen. I refused to provide childcare. They left anyway. Officer Ramirez frowned, looking at the kids who were happily eating crackers on the floor. They just left. Did you agree to this at any point? No, I said. I explicitly told them I was leaving. They threw diapers at me and drove away. Here is the recording of the phone call I made to them at 2:00 p.m., giving them a deadline to return. I played the audio. The officers listened in silence. When Jessica's voice screeched, "We are not coming back," and Mark threatened to sue me, Officer Miller's eyebrows shot up. They're in Aspen, Miller asked. They are on their way, probably 3 hours out by now, I said. And they are the legal guardians. Yes, Jessica and Mark. Officer Miller sighed, the heavy sigh of a man who hated domestic disputes. Okay, this is a civil matter usually, but leaving kids with an unwilling party, technically, that endangers them if you were to leave. Since you're refusing care, we have to contact CPS. But first, we're going to call your father. Please do, I said. Miller used his radio to call dispatch, then dialed the number I gave him on his personal cell, putting it on speaker. This is Frank, my father answered. He sounded drunk, or maybe just high on adrenaline. Who is this? This is Officer Miller with the Oakville Police Department. I'm standing in your kitchen with your daughter, Hannah. The silence on the other end was heavy. She actually called you, Frank whispered. She did, sir, and she has informed us that she is not the legal guardian of these children and did not consent to care for them. You have left 2 toddlers effectively unsupervised. That is a criminal offense, sir. Child endangerment and abandonment. That's ridiculous. Jessica's voice came from the background, panicked now. She's their aunt, she's right there. Ma'am, Officer Ramirez spoke up, leaning toward the phone. Being a relative does not conscript someone into childcare. She has stated she is leaving. If you are not here to take custody of your children, they will be taken into protective custody by the state within the hour. You can't do that, Mark shouted. Do you know who we are? I know you're about to have a warrant issued for your arrest if you don't turn that car around right now, Miller barked, losing his patience. I want you back at this residence. Drive safely, but get here. We will be waiting. He hung up. They're coming back, Miller said, looking at me. But we have to wait until they arrive to ensure the safety of the children. Do you mind if we wait here? Not at all, I said. The next 3 hours were an agonizing purgatory. Officer Ramirez played with the kids. Officer Miller drank coffee I made him. I sat at the table, continuing my audit. I needed to know how deep the rot went. If they were willing to abandon the kids, what else had they done? I logged onto a credit monitoring site. I had my own identity locked down tight, a perk of the job, but I had a hunch. I used the forgot password feature for a credit agency and typed in my father's email address just to see if an account existed. It didn't. But then I typed in my social security number, but with his email address as the recovery contact. It pinged, account found. My stomach dropped. I reset the password using the security questions. I knew the name of his first pet and his mother's maiden name, obviously, and got in. My credit report was clean, but there was a section for authorized users. There it was, a credit card, opened 4 years ago. The primary account holder was Frank, but he had added me as a joint account holder without my knowledge, likely forging a signature, to boost the credit limit based on my score. And the balance, $75,000. He had been funding his life on my credit history. If he defaulted on this, which the foreclosure notice suggested was imminent, debt collectors wouldn't just come for him, they would come for me. They would garnish my wages. I could lose my license. I could lose my job. He hadn't just used me as a babysitter. He had strapped a financial suicide vest to my chest and handed me the detonator. I printed the page. My hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from a cold, absolute fury. Officer, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room. Miller looked up from his notebook. Yeah. I'd like to add to the report, I said, holding up the paper. I just discovered evidence of identity theft and credit card fraud, committed by my father. Miller stood up, his face hardening. Keep that paper separate, Hannah. Tonight just got a lot more complicated for your dad. The sound of an engine roaring up the driveway broke the silence. Tires screeched on the pavement. Car doors slammed. They're here, Ramirez said, standing up and placing a hand on her utility belt. I stood up too. I grabbed the stack of papers, the photos, the foreclosure notice, the fraud evidence. I walked to the front door, the officers flanking me like bodyguards. The front door flew open. Frank marched in, his face purple with rage, Jessica and Mark right behind him. "You ungrateful, spiteful little," Frank started, raising a finger at me. "Step back, sir," Officer Miller shouted, stepping in front of me. "Back away from her." Frank froze, seemingly realizing for the first time that there were actual uniformed police officers in his hallway. The color drained from his face. "We came back," Jessica cried, pushing past Frank to grab the kids, playing the role of the terrified mother. "We came back, you can leave now." "We aren't leaving just yet," Officer Miller said, crossing his arms. "We need to verify the welfare of the children and take a statement regarding the threats made." "And," I said, stepping out from behind the officer. I held up the credit card statement. "We need to talk about the $75,000 you stole from me, Dad." Frank looked at the paper. His eyes went wide. The fight went out of him instantly. He slumped against the doorframe, looking suddenly old and small. "Hannah," he croaked, "please, not in front of them." "You did it in front of everyone," I said, my voice steady. "You stole my identity, you abandoned your grandkids, you tried to ruin me." I turned to Officer Miller. "I would like to press charges." The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a structural collapse. The hallway, usually a thoroughfare for my family's frantic, superficial activity, felt like a courtroom. Frank stared at the credit card statement in my hand as if it were a loaded gun. His mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping for air, but the smooth, confident lies he had relied on for decades deserted him. "Fraud," Officer Miller repeated, the word hanging in the air like smoke. He took the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning the lines of debt, the dates, the sheer volume of the theft. He looked up at Frank, his expression shifting from annoyance to professional suspicion. "Sir, is this your account?" It's a family matter," Frank stammered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the winter draft still swirling from the open door. He tried to straighten his spine, to summon the patriarch, but the uniform in front of him wasn't impressed by his bluster. "My daughter, she's confused. We share finances. It's an understanding." "I am not confused," I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic defense. I turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time in years without the filter of fear. He wasn't a giant. He was just a thief in a North Face jacket. "I never signed anything, Dad. I never authorized you to open a card in my name. I never authorized you to rack up $75,000 of debt to fund a lifestyle you can't afford." "Hannah, stop it," Jessica shrieked. She was clutching the kids now, but her eyes were darting between me and Frank, panic rising in her chest. "Why are you doing this? You're ruining Christmas. So he borrowed some money, he's Dad. He would pay you back." "With what, Jessica?" I asked, turning my gaze to her. It was time. The trap wasn't just the police, it was the truth. I walked back to the kitchen island and picked up the red folder, the one Frank had hidden under the golf magazines. "You think he's rich," I said, walking toward her. "You think you're the golden child who gets the ski trips and the nanny and the easy life because you deserve it. You think I'm the worker bee because I'm boring." I held out the foreclosure notice. "Look at it." Jessica hesitated, her manicured hand trembling as she reached out. Mark leaned over her shoulder, his arrogance evaporating as he read the bold red letters at the top of the page. "Notice of default. Foreclosure proceedings imminent." "The house is gone, Jess," I said, my voice quiet but relentless. "In 90 days, the bank takes it. There is no money. The hardware store is failing. The investments are gone. The reason he called me, the reason he needed me here, wasn't just to babysit. It was to guilt me into a loan. He needed my credit score to keep the lights on for another month." "No," Jessica whispered, the color draining from her face. She looked at Frank, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. "Dad, you said the trust was liquid. You said we were going to Aspen on the dividends." Frank looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The shame was palpable. It radiated off him in waves. "I was handling it," Frank muttered, his voice cracking. "I just needed a bridge loan. Hannah would have given it to me if she wasn't so selfish." "Selfish?" Mark shouted, stepping away from Frank as if he were contagious. "You told me you were funding my startup next month. You lied to me." "You lied to all of us," Jessica said, her voice rising to a keen. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't the princess. She was another victim. She had been groomed to be helpless, to rely on a fortune that didn't exist. "You made me fire the nanny because you couldn't pay her, didn't you? You made me leave my kids with her because you couldn't afford the extra plane ticket for a sitter." "I did it for you," Frank roared, finally snapping. He lunged toward us, his face twisted in ugly, desperate rage. "I did it to keep this family together, to keep up appearances. And this is how you repay me, you ungrateful." "That's enough," Officer Miller shouted, stepping in and grabbing Frank's arm before he could reach me. Frank tried to jerk away, his temper overcoming his sense. "Get your hands off me. This is my house." "Actually, according to this bank notice, that's debatable," Officer Ramirez remarked dryly, moving in to assist. "You are under arrest," Miller said, spinning Frank around and pushing him against the wall. The sound of handcuffs clicking, metal on metal, sharp and final, echoed through the entryway. "For identity theft, fraud, and disturbance of the peace. We'll let the district attorney decide if he wants to add child endangerment to the list." "You can't do this," Frank yelled, struggling as they marched him toward the door. "Hannah, tell them to stop. I'm your father." I watched him. I watched the man who had controlled every aspect of my life, who had made me feel small so he could feel big, being led away like a common criminal. "You are my father," I said, my voice steady, though tears were finally pricking my eyes. "But you're also a criminal, and I'm done paying your bills." They let him out. The blue lights of the cruiser swirled across the snow-covered lawn, illuminating the faces of the neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the commotion. The public was watching. The reputation he had sacrificed everything to protect was destroyed in an instant. Jessica stood in the hallway, holding her children, surrounded by her luggage. She looked at the open door, then at me. The haughty, cruel sister was gone. In her place was a terrified woman realizing she had no home, no money, and no father to catch her. "Hannah," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what are we going to do?" I looked at her, then at the kids. I picked up my bag. "I don't know what you are going to do, Jessica," I said, putting on my coat. "But I'm going back to Chicago. I have work on Monday." The fallout was swift, messy, and absolute. I didn't stay for Christmas. I stayed in a hotel that night, gave my statement to the detectives the next morning, and flew home on the first flight out. I spent Christmas Day alone in my apartment, eating takeout Chinese food and watching old movies. It was the most peaceful holiday I had ever experienced. Frank didn't get bail. Because of the flight risk and the sheer amount of fraud involved, it turned out I wasn't the only one. He had opened cards in my deceased mother's name too. The judge was not lenient. He eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and identity theft to avoid a trial that would have aired every dirty laundry item the family possessed. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The house was foreclosed on in February. It was sold at auction for a fraction of what Frank claimed it was worth. Jessica's world collapsed just as I knew it would. Without Frank's support, which was really just debt shuffling, Mark S. Facade crumbled too. It turned out he was just as broke as Frank. They divorced 3 months later. Mark moved back in with his parents, and Jessica was left with the kids and no job history. But that is where the story shifts. For months, I blocked their numbers. I communicated only through Sarah, my lawyer, who ruthlessly scrubbed my credit report clean. We proved the fraud, and the $75,000 debt was removed from my name. My financial reputation was restored. Then, about 6 months after the arrest, I received a letter. Not a text, a letter. It was from Jessica. "Hannah, I know you probably won't read this. I wouldn't blame you. I'm living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Oakville. I got a job. I'm working reception at a dental office. It's not glamorous and I'm terrible at it, but I'm learning. The kids are in daycare. I wanted to hate you. For a long time, I did. I blamed you for the house, for Dad, for Mark leaving. But last week, I was looking at our old family albums and I realized something. In every picture, you're in the background, cleaning up, or holding the bags, or fixing something. And Dad and I are in the front, smiling. He played us both, Hannah. He used you for money, but he used me for his ego. He made me useless so I would never leave him. You got out. You built a life I never did. I'm not asking for money, I promise, but I don't know how to budget. I don't know how to file taxes. I don't know how to be an adult. You're the only person I know who does. If you're willing, could you teach me? Not do it for me, just teach me. Love, Jess. I stared at the letter for a long time. The old Hannah, the doormat, would have driven down there with a checkbook and fixed everything. The angry Hannah, the one who called the cops, would have shredded it. But I wasn't either of those women anymore. I was free, and because I was free, I could choose. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. Hello, Jessica answered on the first ring, her voice sounding small and tired. Hi, Jess, I said. Hannah, she sounded shocked. I didn't think you'd call. I got your letter, I said. I looked around my apartment, my clean, quiet, solvent sanctuary. I'm not going to give you money, and I'm not going to talk to Dad, ever. I know, she said quickly. I don't speak to him either. But, I continued, if you want to learn how to manage a budget, we can set up a Zoom call on Sunday. I can show you how to set up a spreadsheet. There was a silence on the other end, and then a sound I hadn't heard from my sister in 20 years. A genuine, relieved sob. Thank you, she wept. Thank you, Hannah. Don't screw it up, I said, but there was no bite in my voice, only a weary kind of hope. Sunday at noon, don't be late. I hung up the phone. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline, the lights twinkling in the distance. I had lost a father, but I had saved myself. And maybe, just maybe, I had helped my sister start the long, hard process of saving herself too. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I wasn't the bank. I was just Hannah, and for the first time in my life, that was enough.